the three principles and the truth behind the three principles. So I'm briefly going to introduce Amy, and then I'm going to explain why we're talking, and then I'm going to hand it over to Amy. So Amy is a psychiatrist and a coach and a public speaker and just this amazing person. I found her, sorry to embarrass you, this will just take a moment.
Oh, take your time.
Okay. She also has great hair. So I was introduced to Amy by Stephen Chandler through one of his podcasts. And what struck me through the initial sort of podcast that he had done with her is how much sort of reverence and respect that he had for Amy. So it created this incredible sort of curiosity in me to find out more about Amy. Sorry, I'm talking about you in the third person here.
It's okay.
So then I started just reading her books, and what I realized is that she was providing sort of everything that she did was basic, or in terms of how I understood it, was basically a beautiful metaphor and she would use everyday life experiences. She would use her experience as a mother of 2 children and a wife and a professional. But what I really sort of got through the lines or through the metaphors that she was presenting was sort of very deep and meaningful truths about life that was really resonating with the work I was doing and what I was reading. And I remember our first communication was sort of like, wow, what you're doing is totally similar to sort of Advaita concepts. And this is before I knew what the three principles were or are. And it just seemed very sort of, it resonates with sort of this concept of Sat Sit Ananda, and forgive my pronunciation, which is being, consciousness, and bliss. And so being would be similar to the three principles in terms of universal mind, consciousness is consciousness, and then bliss in terms of how it's defined from a non-duality perspective is the absence of thought. And so that's taking things very sort of complicated, and that's not the point of this call. The point of this call is to really break it down and to present it in a way that can help people understand it. So with that sort of long introduction in terms of why we're here, I'd love to turn it over to Amy and really sort of maybe start us off just sort of explaining how you got to where you are in terms of sort of how you've evolved in your understanding of reality in terms of your practice and
Yeah, well, I think I don't know. I feel like, I'm always kind of learning things from you as well in terms of like what so and so says, and what this book says and what this theory says. Because honestly, I'm not up on a lot of that stuff, and so I love just the idea, like what you just said, that there is some movement or a person or something out there that talks about bliss as an absence of thought and things like that. It's really cool just to like have the conversations we've had and that I've had with other people as well, and just see how everything kind of converges. So, for me, I kind of grew up reading and learning about and talking about spiritual things. I read like Course in Miracles type of stuff and a lot of Wayne Dyer, and like my mom had it lying around the house, and it was just the kind of, understanding that we grew up in. And so, in some ways this is all just extremely natural, and the three principles, which we'll talk about, is just sort of an extension on, what I kind of have known about life. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Like that's why it resonates so much. It's like we already know this, we just don't have words and a framework for it necessarily. And then in other ways, it's kind of completely brand new. And the way that it's completely brand new and that it's really kind of changed my life in the last couple of years is just in what it's done. I mean, it doesn't, the spiritual things that I always kind of heard about as a kid, like there was comfort in that, and it made good sense, and it definitely affected what I did in decision making and some stuff to some extent, but not like this has, not like in the past couple years. I mean, just kind of being exposed to these ideas that we're going to talk about. I can't explain it. I don't know how it's happened or how it's worked, but I know that life feels very different now, just kind of from having a glimpse of it within this particular kind of structure, that we're going to talk about. So I'm sure different things, ring more or less true for different people. For me, it's just, this has been kind of the big ringer.
There's so much in what you just said. I mean, we could get into sort of the difference in terms of how you approach your practice from a purely psychological or purely, psychiatrist type, Jungian or Freud background versus the three principles. Or we could just jump into what the three principles are. And I have some quotes from Sid Banks.
Let's just jump in. I mean, I actually, I've always just practiced as a coach rather than as a psychologist.
Okay.
So to some extent, the approach is definitely different for me to some extent, but it's probably less so than it might look. Because again, just as a psychologist, I never was like a traditional by the book kind of licensed psychologist. I was always working as more of a spiritual coach anyway. So if you're letting me vote, let's just jump into the principles. That's my vote. If I could stay here.
This isn't a democracy. So I kind of, there's a very curated sort of explanation here of the three principles from Sid Banks, and maybe it would serve everyone just to read that. It's very short. It's about a half a page. Okay. So universal mind. So the three are the universal mind, consciousness, and thought. Now I'm just going to read this, and if people want me to slow down, just rewind. The beauty of this is this is recorded, so they can rewind. So universal mind. The Eastern philosophers say big mind, little mind, and here's the paradox. The ego is the mind. That's the self-centered me, the big hot shot. The only thing in the world. Oh my God, everything's cut off here. Let me start over. The Eastern philosophers say big mind, little mind. And here's the paradox. The little mind is the ego mind. That's the self-centered me, the big hot shot. The only thing in the world worth looking at in the mirror is me. The big mind, on the other hand, is the divine mind, the universal mind, which is the intelligence of literally all things in this world or any other world. That's the mind you should be looking for. That's the mind that has the power to guide you through life. Okay, so we'll get into that. Or maybe we should just stop here and get right into that.
Either way, you call it.
But it's so hard to talk about it without providing sort of story and context and all that. But I'll just get through it and then we can go back. Consciousness. Consciousness gives us the ability to realize the existence of life. Consciousness has an infinite number of levels. You will never come to the end of consciousness. It's literally impossible because consciousness is infinite. There is no end to it. And that's a beautiful thing to know because it means to say that there is no end to you finding beauty, love, and understanding of this world. Thought. Remember, and this is very important, you're only one thought away from happiness. You're only one thought away from sadness. The secret lies in thought. It's the missing link that everybody in the world is looking for. It's a gift that we were given to have the freedom to walk through life and see what we want to see. How much better than that can you get? That you have the freedom to walk through life and see as a free thinker. That is the greatest gift ever, to be a free thinker. Okay.
Yeah. So now what?
I mean, there's so much there, right? So the best way of proceeding is to offer a metaphor. And I love sort of the metaphor that you find in Eastern philosophy that's also been popularized by Michael McNeil, which is the philosophy or the metaphor of the projector, the film projector. So maybe we can talk about sort of the whole first and then deconstruct it.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the metaphor you're talking about is just one that kind of puts these three pieces that you just read into one kind of framework in a sense that just, ties them together in a way. So the film projector metaphor is that, if our experiences, we're thinking about like kind of an old school film projector, the thought, our ability to be a free thinker is what's on the film, right? It's that old school kind of roll of film. It's sort of the content, it's what's on there. Consciousness is the projector that brings that film, what's on that film, to life and gives us an experience of it. So if the roll of film is just sitting in a closet somewhere, no one's having an experience of it. It's still there. I mean, it exists, I suppose, but there's no experience of it. So consciousness is what gives us an experience. And the mind is what the projector is plugged into. So mind is just universal mind, as he calls it in that quote, is what kind of powers everything. And so the three principles, what they are as three principles, is a description of how these three things kind of all work together. Mind, thought, and consciousness. I mean, said really simply, we're alive, that's mind, we think, and we're aware. And it's really, truly is that simple in terms of the definition, in terms of like what are the three principles. It's basically saying that we're alive, we think, and we're aware of our thinking. And that's the only thing we're ever aware of is our own thinking.
So the first thing that comes up for people, I think, is the concept of universal mind and what is that, and how do I access that, and isn't my mind talking all the time, and like what I don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. So universal mind is sort of, it's what people call God. It's what people call, there's a million names for it. It's what people call spirit or energy or life force or, whatever they call it. So it's that big, universal, all that is kind of all-encompassing energy. It's what gives us life. And, we have these organs in our body, but something is powering the organs, and that's mind. We have trees and flowers in nature, but something is powering them. And so it's simply just that idea of, that there is something bigger than us that's powering us at all times. And it is always running through us, I mean, it's very simple. If you're alive, you have mind running through you, universal mind.
Right. Of course, but then why do people have so much problems accessing it? Or rather, how do people access it?
Yeah, I don't think anyone has a problem accessing it, and I don't think we need a how-to access it. I think we just have a lot of thinking about, like, we make it difficult. We make it into a problem, like, I can't access it, or, it's not there, or it's not working for me. Well, that's just our own ego and our own thinking, that's making things really complicated. I mean, again, like if we're sitting here breathing and our hearts are beating, we're accessing, there's nothing we have to do. Like, those things just happen on our behalf. And so to take it into a realm that's like, kind of believing that we need to do something to like make mind, kick it up a notch or make it better than it already is. I think that's just a lot of insecurity, a lot of kind of insecure thinking, which we all have from time to time, but we want to kind of manipulate it or run the show more than just sort of seeing how it's already there. It's a universal fact that's within all of us.
All right, I'm gonna press you a little bit more here. Then what is intuition?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I think intuition is another way that people talk about mind working through them. So, as mind comes through us, it does any number of things, and I think our intuition, and again, people might disagree with this, this is just kind of how it occurs to me. Intuition is one manifestation of mind. It's just one way that mind shows up for us, is we do have intuition. And no, we don't always have access to that intuition, but do we always have anything? Our entire experience is always kind of in flux. So that we sometimes have access to intuition, and that there are sometimes things we can do to kind of hone our intuition and make it a little more likely. that's great. You know, it's something that's there for us kind of at any time, and that doesn't mean we always have kind of a direct line straight to it.
Mm. So I'm actually sort of trying to get at sort of the duality between sort of, the big mind and the little mind, and sort of how to help people sort of either separate, probably is the wrong word, probably integrate would be a more correct word. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're sort of listening to the big mind, or being in flow with life, we're clearly not at that point operating from an egoic perspective, the egoic mind, as Eckhart Tolle would say. So how do you help people sort of access the big mind as opposed to the little mind, which, let's face it, we sort of are taught by society to be sort of egoic, not in a negative way, but just in a very sort of survival type way, when we're children and really need to sort of develop survival strategies and such.
Yeah. So I think, the way I look at it is that um, mind is always running through us all the time. Intuition and bliss and higher levels of consciousness and all of that good stuff is always there. The only time that we're not, when we're not really experiencing it is when we are kind of caught up in the little mind, right? So we have a lot of thinking. We're in a low state of mind, just in like a personal level and a psychological level. We have a lot on our minds. We're really consumed with it. Our moods are low. When we're in a low state of mind, mind is still there, and we still have access. There's still nothing we have to do to access it, but all of that ego chatter, does tend to kind of obscure it. So to sort of, to the extent that there's something to do to help people, I think, to tip the scales a little bit, I think it's just understanding how that works, and when people start to see, oh, like, this is my natural state, this connection with all of this wonderful stuff that's infinitely helpful and, powers everything in the world is my natural state. The only time I'm not experiencing that is when I'm lost in my own low state of mind. And that thought is always changing. Our ego state, it's not a stable state. That's always changing as well. It's part of nature, right? So all of this is always in flux. And that kind of seeing how those things work together, such that, like, when you see that, okay, I'm in a low state of mind, and my state of mind will naturally rise on its own, because that's what happens. Like, the ego stuff will naturally quiet down on its own. I don't have to step in and make that happen. Then we tend to just kind of ride it out in a sense. We act from low states of mind far less. We don't take them so seriously. We don't get so consumed. We don't try to fix it or change it. And when we do all those things, it truly does change quite quickly, and it's just kind of a non-issue. It's like you see with children, they come in and out of moods, and it just doesn't matter. I mean, there's nothing disruptive about that, even for a child, for the most part. My kids bawl their eyes out, and then they, like, laugh their heads off 2 minutes later, and it doesn't even, like, it's just part of life, it isn't an issue. And it could be like that for us adults as well. And so kind of having that understanding of how it all works is what makes it happen kind of more.
Oh,